When the SEC expanded to 16 teams and eliminated divisions, we knew that would come at the expense of certain annual rivalries. Some have already gone by the wayside, and other annual rivalries will continue to drop off in the years to come. So, what rivalries, both inside and outside of the SEC, will we miss most? And do we miss most? We'll discuss today on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. Lots of rivalry talk, scheduling talk to get to. But first, John, want to be kind of current in the headlines. The end of last week, Tennessee quarterback Joey Aguilar lost a ruling in court. Joey Aguilar was trying to get an additional year of college eligibility to come back and remain Tennessee's starting quarterback. For those who've been following along, Aguilar's already spent 7 years in college. He's played 5 seasons. He also had a redshirt year in junior college. He also had a COVID year in junior college. So he was seeking an 8th year in college, what would have been his 6th season in addition to the redshirt and COVID years. Tried it in front of a hometown judge, hometown court, but maybe in a bit of an upset, the NCAA won the ruling, and so Joey Aguilar will not get to return, if this ruling holds, as the Tennessee 8th year senior quarterback. Apparently 7 years is enough. So, surprised by this ruling? Is this where you thought it would land, and what does it mean for Tennessee?
No, I am surprised. Maybe they should have argued for a change of venue, Aguilar's attorneys, and asked to have the court held in Neyland Stadium. I thought just being in Knoxville would be enough. The judge is actually a longtime Tennessee fan, and maybe the build-up to all this actually worked to UT's disadvantage, because maybe he thought everybody's thinking. I was talking to friends the day the decision was made, and they were just snickering over the possibility of a local judge telling Tennessee's quarterback, no, you're not getting any more eligibility. You're done at UT. I mean, what's the benefit of that? But maybe the judge heard enough of this where he just decided, hey, I'm a judge first, a football fan second, and the decision went against Aguilar. And I think it's a big deal, because I think it will make a game or two difference for Tennessee in 2026, and a game or two is significant in today's world.
John, I realize that taking up for the NCAA is like breaking bread with a Soviet spy or inviting the IRS over for beers. It's not generally a popular move, but I've kind of sided a little bit with the NCAA in some of these eligibility cases, such as the Charles Bediako case, the pro basketball player who wanted to return to Alabama and play college basketball once again 3 years after he left college and went pro. He wanted to come back and play college ball. He played a few games, but then ultimately he lost a ruling in court. And now in the case of Aguilar, look, I don't fault Joey Aguilar for shooting his shot. I mean, there were apparently a couple $1 million of NIL money on the line. Who among us would walk away from millions of dollars and at least not give it a shot? But ultimately, I think, is it 7 years? Is 7 years to play 5? I think that's enough, right? Did Joey Aguilar need 8 years to play 6? I say no. And so, again, I know normally the NCAA is not a sympathetic figure. In these particular instances, I leaned toward the NCAA, and the two judges, even though they were hometown judges and their alma maters, seasons were kind of at stake here, or at least under influence. The judges went in favor of the NCAA. I'm wondering what your stance is, because you're kind of a guy that generally is a little bit welcoming of the wild, wild west. I feel like that's a fair summation, right? I mean, you're not totally against the wild, wild west lifestyle, but did you find the NCAA sympathetic figure at all in these eligibility cases?
Good one, Blake. You haven't lost your sense of humor one bit. No, I don't have sympathy for the NCAA. It just, it's such a win for the NCAA, and they get so few wins in court. I mean, it's to be cherished. The NCAA should declare it a holiday in college sports for getting the W here. It's so unusual. Uh, I just, yes, this is. I prefer not to fight through this era. So many people rail against NIL, transfer portal, all these changes. But I've been in this business long enough. I've seen so many different changes. I still like watching the games. So I just try to roll with it. And amid all the chaos, I've learned to embrace it and just say, bring on more chaos. So yeah, I don't care how long these guys play. But I did think it was kind of funny to actually, when you hear it, when an attorney in Joey Aguilar's case, arguing on his behalf, talked about the financial hardship this would impose on his client. Hey, he's not going to be able to make $2 million this year as a college student. How horrible. He'll never recover from this. His life is virtually over. So no, that was amusing to me.
Yeah, the NCAA, you mentioned that they don't often get a chance to celebrate courtroom victories. They really spiked the football in this situation. The NCAA
Yeah.
released a statement after their courtroom win on Friday and said, quote, "We will continue to defend the NCAA's eligibility rules against attempts to circumvent foundational policies and hinder fair competition to all student athletes." In other words, the sheriff woke up and we're at least going to make a half-hearted try to enforce the rules that we do have. And look, John, I mean, if there's anyone I have less sympathy for than the NCAA, it's these coaches who they cry from the mountaintops of, we want guardrails, we want rules. Where are the rules? Where are the guardrails? And then anytime their athlete is trying to break the rules and just play in perpetuity until they become like 40 years old and can't athletically cut it anymore, then the coaches are rallying behind them and say, to hell with the rules. Why can't this guy play forever? And so I don't really have any sympathy for these coaches. Whenever they beg for guardrails, they really don't want guardrails. They want rules to impede their competition, but they don't want any rules for themselves. And then as soon as they have an athlete that they need, in the case of Alabama basketball, they needed a pro basketball player to shore up their March Madness pursuit. For Tennessee, they need a starting quarterback, so they need an eighth-year senior. As soon as it works out to their benefit, it's like, wait, never mind what we said about wanting guardrails. We don't want any of those guardrails. We need this young man to still be able to play ball and take snaps at quarterback for us. So, I don't have any sympathy for the coaches and the universities when they lose these cases, certainly, because I mean the reality is they only want guardrails whenever it works to their benefit, and whenever the guardrails impede them, they want nothing to do with those guardrails.
I love it when the NCAA statements. That was awesome.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's
that
just
was,
getting.
like I said, it was a real spike in the football, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was akin to a defensive player, sacking the quarterback or intercepting a pass when his team's down 34-7, and taunting the opposing player as if, yeah, I showed you. Uh, this is just one case, and court cases just aren't going the NCAA's way. But I guess as the great Butch Jones once emphasized at Tennessee when he was football coach for 5 years, he would always say, "Celebrate the small victories." So the NCAA should indeed celebrate.
When Nico Iamaleava left Tennessee around this time a year ago, John, it was a couple weeks after this, I guess, but left last spring for UCLA, one of the big things I thought about was how did that change the floor and ceiling of Tennessee's season? And as I look back on it in hindsight, so Tennessee brought in Joey Aguilar, and to his credit, delivered immensely in their time of need. Wasn't a perfect season. There were a few games where, had some interception bugs, but overall, he stepped up for Tennessee, transferring in from UCLA when UCLA decided they'd rather have Nico than Joey Aguilar as their quarterback. he goes to Rocky Top, and Tennessee goes 8-5. And as I look back on it, like I don't really think Tennessee's record would have been much different, if at all, if they'd had Nico Iamaleava as their quarterback. I mean, one of Tennessee's biggest problems last year was its defense wasn't up to snuff. Allowed 45 points in a loss to Vanderbilt, allowed 30 points in a loss to Illinois, allowed 37 points in a loss to Alabama. I could go on and on. Allowed a bunch of points in a loss to Georgia, in which Aguilar played fabulous. So, point being, I don't really think there was much difference in the record if they would have had Nico versus what they got at Aguilar. And now spinning it forward, I'm wondering, I mean, this is not a great development for Tennessee. Obviously, they would have preferred another season with Aguilar. But now as they turn the page, redshirt freshman George McIntyre is first in line to take over the duties as starting quarterback. I'm wondering, what's sort of the floor and ceiling difference? Do you see it with Aguilar as Tennessee's quarterback if he would have been allowed to come back and play another year versus the realities that they have now, having to go young with a talented but unproven and also a very thinly built quarterback in George McIntyre?
Yes, I really value experience in college quarterbacking now more than ever. Maybe because I'm surrounded by more experienced quarterbacks.
Yeah.
The 7 and 8 year veterans weren't very prominent 5 years ago. I think it makes a huge difference, though, for Tennessee. Yeah, George McIntyre may turn out to be okay, but we don't know that. And keep in mind with Joey Aguilar, he didn't even go through spring ball last year. He had to learn the system, cram it into a summer, and during that same time frame, he had to develop rapport with his receivers. He's got that now. He had two. He has two of his starting receivers returning and a promising tight end in Ethan Davis. He's got 3 offensive linemen back. He's got more talent on defense and a better defensive coaching staff, I think. He's got a greater supporting cast. And usually quarterbacks in a Heupel system get better with experience. I think also keep in mind that Aguilar was playing last year with a injury to his throwing arm. He had it was a non-malignant tumor on his arm, but it restricted his motion somewhat and caused pain, particularly when he threw the deep ball. So he's a better quarterback early in the year than he was at the end because of that injury. Healthy again after that's removed, more experience. I think Joey Aguilar would have been a really good quarterback for Tennessee. I think he would have been a better quarterback than he was. I thought of Tennessee as a playoff contender with Aguilar back. I don't think it's a playoff contender now.
And I mentioned McIntyre's frame. I mean, that is one of the questions with him. He's officially listed at 6'6", 195 pounds. Put the numbers aside. I mean, if you see him, you can tell. I mean, this is a thin guy. He's tall, lanky. No one questions his talent, really. I mean, he's always gotten high praise in terms of his upside and his talent, and that goes back to his recruiting days. But you do have to. I think it's fair to wonder about his durability and beyond that, like you said, the experience. And I look at games on Tennessee's schedule, 3 home games in particular. We know Tennessee has been so good since Josh Heupel was hired as coach inside Neyland Stadium. And I look at a few games as like swing games in Tennessee's season. In September, they're going to be at home against Texas. Of course, 3rd Saturday in October, they will be at home against Alabama. And then in November, Lane Kiffin comes back at home against LSU. I mean, on every game in the schedule, but those 3 games in particular, I think, man, wouldn't it have been nice to have Aguilar in those swing games versus we don't know what George McIntyre is going to do. Maybe he'll be a star. Maybe he won't. You know, the durability thing is a question that's out there. But in those games and some others, I think it would have been nice for Tennessee's sake to have Aguilar. And so in that way, even though I say, you know, in the long run, I don't think there was much difference for Tennessee in 2025 between having Nico versus having Aguilar. There's no way to know this for sure, but I do think we'll look back on 2026 when it's all said and done and say, yeah, Tennessee probably would have been a game or 2 or maybe even 3 better if they would have had Joey Aguilar as their quarterback instead of George McIntyre, whoever wins that job, which I think sort of matches your thinking. If you say you think Tennessee maybe was a playoff contender with Aguilar, you lean toward them not being a playoff contender without him.
Yeah, I just and as you know now, just one or two games make such a big difference in a college football season when you are vying for a college football playoff. Uh, so I don't want to. I mean, George McIntyre could turn out to be a really good quarterback. You just never know. And sometimes quarterbacks who are very thin uh, still have durability. They don't
Mm-hmm.
get hurt. Peyton Manning wasn't a bodybuilder when he started for Tennessee way back in 1994. Very thin guy,
Great
not
point.
as thi-
Yeah.
yeah, not as thin as McIntyre though, but he was very thin. He got bigger and stronger as his college career went along. But some guys have Manning had a great knack for getting rid of the ball, didn't get hit that much. He got a quick release. Maybe McIntyre will do the same thing. We just don't know. Uh, but what we do know is what Aguilar could do. I mean, we go back to that early season game against Georgia. I mean, Tennessee scored 41 points on Georgia and lost because it missed a field goal. But Joey Aguilar in that situation really showed me something. And to do that against a Kirby Smart defense was so impressive. He showed what he could do in a game. And another thing we don't know about unproven quarterbacks, we don't know how they will perform when they're the guy and they're playing under pressure. And I thought Joey Aguilar, for the most part, handled that very well.
All right, John. We'll leave that conversation there. I'm sure there'll be more to say about Tennessee's quarterback situation and competition in the weeks to come. But we want to get to some rivalry talk. And here's what we're going to do. John and I have spent some time thinking about 8 college football rivalries that at one time were played annually, played each and every year. And now either those rivalries have gone dormant, or at the very least, they're not going to be played every year, or already have stopped becoming an annual affair. And we decided to open this up. These are not strictly limited to rivalries involving SEC teams. We've got a couple mixed in here that we miss that involve teams from outside the SEC, but several of them involve at least one team from the SEC. And of course, John and I, with our decades apart in age, have a little bit different perspective on this, but we had some overlap in our conversation before we started recording here. But we're going to break it down like this. John will get 4 picks. I will get 4 picks. So together, we're going to save 8 rivalry games if we could wave our magic wand and put these games on the annual schedule in perpetuity. So, John, why don't you get us rolling here? What's a rivalry game that you wish could be played every year like it once was?
And again, I'm dating myself with that, but I do that all the time. So I'm very comfortable with it. One of my all-time favorite college football games, it once was played on Thanksgiving weekend, was Nebraska, Oklahoma, and go back to the 70s, and even before that, but a lot in the 70s when both teams were contending for national championship. Just a great rivalry. The 1971 Nebraska-Oklahoma game is regarded as one of the greatest games of all time. 35-31, Nebraska won on a last-minute drive and went on to an unbeaten season, won the national championship. Oklahoma finished second nationally. So those were both super teams, very talented. I covered a Nebraska-Oklahoma game in 1985 when I was a columnist in Jacksonville, Florida. I always wanted to go to a game in Oklahoma, so I had my own travel budget. So I said, yeah, that looks like a good game. I think the Jacksonville readers will just love hearing about that game. So I get there, and it's one of my favorite press box moments. I think I've told this before on our podcast, but one of my favorite press box moments. The game, they had all kinds of national writers, college football national writers there in the press box, and some of us were sitting on a back row that they just sort of an auxiliary row they had created. It was a game. Both 10 of teams were top 10 teams. Game played in November, and I still remember this man showed up, a sports writer. He had a credential. and he was dressed in all red with a red cowboy hat, and he had two toy pistols in holsters, a belt around his waist. I mean, it was like right out of a movie. I could still see him in the press box, and I thought, oh my gosh, we refer to, with indignation, refer to homers in a
Mm-hmm.
press box, homers among sports writers. This guy took it to another level, and my guess is he covered every game. But there he was, yeah.
Did he fire off those pistols whenever
No,
his teams? Was he first of all? Was he for the Sooners or was he for Nebraska?
you know what? I really believe he was for Nebraska. As I remembered, he was from Nebraska.
Okay.
So this was a road trip. I think he was with maybe a weekly paper in Nebraska. But
Brought his toy pistols with him.
yeah, he was gonna. Yeah, they referred to, it was common to refer to big games as shootouts back then, and he was ready to take an active role.
I wonder, John, with Nebraska mired in mediocrity for many years now, if this one, I have no major objection to this coming back on an annual basis, but I guess I don't remember the glory days like to the extent that you did of this rivalry, and I wonder if it came back now. I mean, it's not like Oklahoma's on top of the sport, but they're closer to the top of the sport than what Nebraska is. Those storied matchups from yesteryear that you're referencing there. I don't know that we could count on those coming back, even if this rivalry was restored. So that's not really an objection. I
No,
think the
you're
heyday
right,
of this one's
though.
probably over.
You know what? You're right, and maybe I should have left that one alone. Let me remember that rivalry as it was way back when both teams were powerhouses in the Big Eight. And yeah, it would be. I tell you what, I wouldn't, if I had my own travel budget and the rivalry was revived November, I wouldn't be flying to Oklahoma or Nebraska to watch that game. Yeah.
I just love the way you approach that job in Jacksonville, John. Columnist for the Jacksonville, Florida paper, and instead of venture into a Georgia game, Florida State game, you said, "Now, you know what our local readers really want here is my take on Oklahoma and Nebraska." But at that time, pre-internet, when everybody relied on the printed sports section, although I kind of laugh about it, they probably were interested in your take on the top game in the college football calendar, even if it wasn't local.
I was a very selfish columnist. I covered things that the Jacksonville columnists shouldn't have. And if you read my clips from those days, you would just assume I was a national columnist. You would have no idea in what state I was working.
I love that.
Had some great trips, though. Go ahead.
Oh, I bet, on the company dime, no less.
Yes, I sure did.
And you didn't ever draw those trips out for an extra day or two and have any personal travels mixed in there, John?
No, I
know
didn't.
you value company money as if it's your own money, right?
I know. I didn't spend a week in Las Vegas covering a championship boxing bout and Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler. Well, maybe I did. Maybe it was 7
A few
days.
trips to Malibu mixed in there.
Yeah, there were a few of those too.
All right, my first pick, John. You got me thinking with Nebraska, or maybe it's former Nebraska athletic director Bill Moose. He had a memoir come out recently that's provided great column fodder for me. Bill Moose writing about all the things he wished he would have achieved as athletic director, as memoirs go. Those who can do, those who can't write a memoir about what they thought about doing. So anyway, inspired by Bill Moose and inspired by your pick of a Nebraska game, I'm going to stick with a Nebraska one for my first pick here, and I'm going with Nebraska, Colorado. I wish this one was played every year. Maybe it's just because I like seeing that Buffalo Ralphie run around out there in a rivalry game. But, when you talk about, you recall Nebraska, Oklahoma being a Thanksgiving week game. Well, for me, I love all those Thanksgiving week rivalries that I grew up on. And when I was coming up in the 90s, it was Nebraska, Colorado as the Thanksgiving week rivalry game. There was an overtime game in 1999. There were some games, as you've pointed out, John, the 2001 route that Colorado crushed Nebraska and was sort of the beginning of the end of the Nebraska dynasty. You reminded me of that before we started recording. So they weren't always good ones, but I don't know. I just have a fond place for those Thanksgiving week games that are no more. And with Nebraska going its own way into the Big Ten, this one is not an annual game anymore. It's been played, a few times as a non-conference game, but it's just not the same as it was as that Thanksgiving week game that I remember in the 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah, when you're talking about that game, I thought I thought back to my favorite Nebraska sports writer, armed with uh, toy pistols, dressed in all red. Imagine him standing at midfield as Ralphie comes roaring out of the
Whoa.
gate onto the field.
Who would you
And
pick in that one? The sports writer or Ralphie?
I don't like his chances with those toy pistols, even if both were firing caps. Maybe just the sheer sight of him could scared Ralphie on a different track, but no, I don't like his chances. But I remember that rivalry too, though it didn't create as much traditional impact as Oklahoma Nebraska did. But I really think the game you mentioned was the end of Nebraska dynasty, the 2001 game. Two Colorado players rushed for over 150 yards in that game. They beat Nebraska the way Nebraska back then used to beat everybody, with just a thunderous running game. But you think back to that game, just 62-36, and Nebraska was unbeaten before that. It still ended up playing for the national title in the Rose Bowl against Miami and just got routed again. And that was
Which, can we have a word on the absurdity of that, John? We can critique the
yeah,
playoff format and, should it be 12 teams, 16 teams? Do we like it this way or that way? I mean, the fact that we have a playoff at all, we probably should still be celebrating. Maybe I shouldn't settle for good and strive for great, but the fact that Nebraska could lose 62-36 to Colorado in the final game of the regular season and still play for the national title and the Rose. I mean, come on.
I think Miami welcomed the matchup.
Oh, I'm sure. Sounds like
it.
Yeah. All right. So we got two involving Nebraska. That's probably plenty given the state of Nebraska football.
Yeah,
nowadays. What else you got for us, John?
Well, let's go SEC for a second.
Okay.
LSU, Alabama. LSU's had some other good rivalries. Alabama, of course, its preeminent rivalry is against Auburn. You don't have a better rivalry than that in college football. It's in state. But LSU and Alabama, going way back to the Bear Bryant days at Alabama, LSU might have won some conference championships if not for the Bear and Alabama. All the success it had some in the 60s, some in the 70s. So I think back to, guess it was, 2011 season. LSU number 1, Alabama number 2, an unbeaten matchup. I think it was in Tiger Stadium. LSU won. Unfortunately, the way things played out, they had the dreaded rematch in the Superdome. Alabama won 21-0. LSU crossed midfield one time, and it was the beginning of the end for Les Miles. Even though it was playing for national championship and unbeaten going into that game, it looked utterly helpless. So,
yeah, and the reason you bring this one up, John, because as I alluded to with the SEC going to 16 teams and it's gotten rid of divisions, this rivalry was maintained for a couple years and it will be played this season. But then in 2027, it falls off the annual docket because, as a reminder for our listeners, the SEC going to a 9-game conference schedule this coming season, but 3 permanent rivals per team. Only those 3 permanent rivals remain on the annual docket. And Alabama, LSU, they were not assigned as annual rivals. Apparently, the SEC thought Tennessee and Auburn were a stiff enough test for Alabama that they didn't want to give them LSU on top of that. as an annual affair. So many big ones in this series. I mean, when you think about the SEC West and how dominant it was there for a time in college football, I mean, it was the division within the conference in college football. I mean, the Alabama LSU game was like the game of the season. Never mind the national championship, never mind whatever came after it. It was like Alabama LSU, this is it, because it's oftentimes was the two best teams within the best division, within the best conference in college football. And I guess I sort of get it from the standpoint of you want to maintain the Iron Bowl, you want to maintain Alabama, Tennessee. I mean, maybe that's too much for Alabama to give them LSU too, but I don't know. I'm with you. It's just the loss of a game that for most of my life was one of the defining games of not just the SEC season, but the college football season. That's a tough blow.
Yeah, it was, and it went further back than that, even though LSU wasn't on the same level. And I thought something that really added to the rivalry was the fact that Nick Saban, generally regarded now as the greatest college football coach of all time, uh, led both of those programs to a national championship. And he was the conquering hero at LSU. And then many LSU fans hated him when he returned to college football after going to the NFL for a few years and then returned to coach Alabama, their
Well,
rivals.
they burned him in effigy one year, did they not, John? I
Yeah.
believe there's one year LSU fans burned Saban in effigy after he came back from the NFL to coach rival Alabama. Yeah, no love remaining at that time anyway for Nick Saban. They can tell tales now that he's on the college game day set and apparently encouraged Lane Kiffin to take the LSU job. Maybe some feelings have thawed, but at one time, no, it was boiling hot. All right, let's stay inside the SEC for my next pick, John. This is one, there are some on our list that go back a long, long ways. Florida, Tennessee, it maybe doesn't have that history. It wasn't until the 90s that this became an annual game. But when you think about SEC as divisional play, I mean, you know it, John. You covered all the big ones in this series during your time as a longtime columnist for the Knoxville News Sentinel. I mean, you had a front row seat to all of this, and this game, when we talk about Alabama LSU as being like a defining game for the SEC West and a defining game of college football season in usually not always, but usually it was in November, right? This one was a defining game generally in September that charted the course for the SEC East, and at least in the 90s, sort of charted the course for the SEC champion as well. And usually Steve Spurrier, not always, but usually Steve Spurrier had the upper hand. Famously, Peyton Manning never conquered the Gators. But man, this is one. I know they're not border states, and it doesn't necessarily have the history. But when you talk to people like of my age, John, like in their late 30s or early 40s, who have all their first memories of college football, say in the 90s, like this was one of the games, as you well know, in college football in the 90s. And I don't know, I just have and really even in the early 2000s, and I have a hard time digesting that this one is not going to be an annual fair anymore.
It just so dominated the 1990s in the SEC. And I still remember before kickoff, it was the 97 Florida Tennessee game in the Swamp. It was, I've never heard a stadium that loud before kickoff. It was just a constant roar, and it was hard to carry on a conversation in a press box. But it just had so many phenomenal games. Most of them went Florida's way, but in 1998, Tennessee won in overtime in Neyland Stadium. The stadium shook, and it was tore the goalpost down. It was just it was an epic moment in college football, I thought, and certainly in the SEC. But there were two other games that really stood out to me, back-to-back games in 1995 with Peyton Manning at quarterback, Tennessee leading 31-21 at one point in the second quarter. uh, and Florida proceeded to just run away with the game and scored. I guess it was 48. It was 31-14, and Florida scored 48 unanswered
Mhm.
points. Fun and gun at its most fun. And then the next season in Neyland Stadium, Florida opened the game by scoring 35 points in the first 20 minutes. It was 35-0. But there were just games like that and moments like that in the series, and it mattered so much. And the fact that it was an early season game and those teams were both really good and championship contenders, it put so much pressure on the loser of that game playing catch up.
Yeah, and I think too, and I think you would agree with me wholeheartedly on this, John. That it's Steve Sarkisian, or not Steve Sarkisian, Steve
Mhm.
Spurrier brought so much to that rivalry as someone who grew up in East Tennessee near Johnson City, grew up a Vols fan, grew up going to games at Neyland Stadium. Well, that time it was Shields Watkins Field, right? And then he goes on to play at Florida because Tennessee was still running the single wing, right? And Spurrier was a more of a passing quarterback, so he goes and plays at Florida and wins a Heisman there, and then of course becomes the wildly successful and legendary coach at Florida. And so you had a guy who grew up rooting for the Vols to then becoming Tennessee and Philip Fulmer's biggest nemesis throughout the 90s, and boy did he know how to rub it in too. The funny thing is, you talk to Spurrier now, and I've developed a pretty good relationship with him. We talk a couple times a year. Like he likes seeing Tennessee do well, and that's not in jest. Like he's not messing around when he says that. Like this was someone who grew up a Vols fan, was going to Tennessee games, and he liked rubbing the salt in the wound when he was beating them. But now I think he kind of likes seeing Tennessee do well. But boy, he loved beating them back then.
He added so much fuel to the rivalry fire, and it was funny how his players picked up on the tone set by their head coach. I'll never forget a Florida offensive lineman. It was advancing the game, and I was in Gainesville all week. And Peyton Manning was a quarterback. It was before the '97 game, his last fling there. And the player said, "I don't respect Peyton Manning as a quarterback or as a person."
No.
And it was just like it was almost like he was thinking something derogatory he could say. He doesn't even know Peyton Manning as a
Right.
person, but he said he probably was thinking, "Boy, coach is going to like this line."
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, put
I
it on the
asked
bulletin
I
board.
asked the player that about that at a Super Bowl I was covering. He was playing in it years later, and he just snickered when I said that.
Don't respect him as a player, as a person. Yeah, with other coaches, that'd probably get you in a lot of hot water. And Spurrier
Not
just
with
said, "Oh, I can one
Spurrier.
up this."
Sure.
All
Mhm.
right, how about another one, John? Your pick now. What rivalry would you like to save on an annual basis?
Well, a rivalry that was just discontinued at Southern Cal and Notre Dame. That was always one of my favorite games. Uh, so many great games, usually that went USC's way. But I can remember, growing up in the South, in SEC country there in Louisiana, even though there were a lot of Notre Dame fans in South Louisiana, there was kind of a rivalry there, an anti Notre Dame sentiment. So as a kid, I pulled for Southern Cal in that game, and Notre Dame was unbeaten in 1964, steamrolling through its schedule. And Southern Cal overcame a 17-0 halftime deficit, won 20-17, and cost Notre Dame a national championship. And then 10 years later, 1974, Notre Dame was up 24-0, and Southern Cal scored 20. I think it was 55 points in 17 minutes, unanswered points. And then you had the Bush push,
Hmm.
Reggie Bush the Iceman Trophy running back pushing Matt Leinart across the goal line there in South. I think it was in South Bend
It was, yeah,
in
2005.
2005. Yeah, it was a great game.
Yeah, yeah. It's completely absurd to me that this is not an annual game. It's going to come back, I'm sure. Will it be annual when it comes back? Maybe not. But there shouldn't even be a question. Like there are some games that should just be an annual affair in college football, and Southern Cal and Notre Dame. I completely agree with you. That has to be on the annual docket. I mean, I think this is a top 10 rivalry in all of college football. Don't you think? Maybe it might even be top 5. I think it's top. I think it's top 10 slam dunk. That in terms of big rivalries in college football, I think it should be on the annual calendar for sure.
And just the sheer talent that's played in those games when you go back over the last 60 years. So many great players on both teams. It's so odd to me. Southern Cal and Notre Dame won't play anymore, at least for now, not on an annual basis. But Southern Cal will play in the Big Ten. It's just kind of some things just don't make sense in
Yeah.
college football now.
Right. Notre Dame should be the team in the Big Ten.
Sure, of course.
And Southern Cal should be a team in a
yes.
Pacific-based conference. And
Yes.
neither of those things are true. It's yeah. Well, sticking with Notre Dame, John, I'm gonna add one more for Notre Dame into the mix here with my next pick because this rivalry doesn't date to your childhood, but it dates to mine, and that's Notre Dame, Michigan. I think this one started annually, like in the late '70s. You think about storied programs, tradition. One of those helmet games, right? You see
Yeah.
the two helmets, and you think this is college football tradition here. Well, that's Notre Dame, Michigan. I mean, again, I think this one, if you can wave your magic wand, this one would be not only an annual rivalry game once again, as it should be, but I think you can make this case for this one being an annual conference rivalry game. Notre Dame makes a lot of sense in the Big Ten, and we know the reasons why they want to be independent. They want to have it their way, sure, whatever. But at the very least, Notre Dame as a non-conference game should be playing Michigan every year, and I think it's since 2019 that they've played. Period. And I know this isn't one of those rivalries that's got like 100 matchups, going back through the years. But again, from the late '70s for what was it, 3+ decades, more than 3 decades, this was an annual game that pitted two of the most storied college football programs against one another. Should be on the annual docket.
And Blake, even though they weren't conference rivals, Notre Dame, of course, an independent, those two schools are not far apart. And I think that the fans interacted so much. Michigan fans hated Notre Dame almost as much as they hated Ohio State. And I think people have forgotten that because the rivalry hasn't continued. But I remember there was a game in '89, I think, Rocket Ishmael, the speedy wide receiver for Notre Dame, returned 2 kickoffs for touchdowns. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the world would you kick the ball to him twice, as if once wasn't enough? But I can't think of as many games in that series that were so significant, but I know how much they mattered to the fan bases.
All right, that leaves us with 2 left, John. So we're saving Nebraska, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Colorado, USC, Notre Dame, Michigan, Notre Dame. Inside the SEC, we're saving Alabama, LSU. We're saving Florida, Tennessee. We each have 1 pick left. What other rivalry are you saving?
I'll go Big 12, Big 8 at one time. Bedlam, Oklahoma State and Oklahoma. It was just it's one of those games that Oklahoma dominated the series. Just dominated the series. But there was so much intensity when you could watch the game, even if the game wasn't close, you could sense the intensity. It was Auburn, Alabama like, or Ole Miss, Mississippi State like, if you want to reference the SEC. But I remember watching a game where Oklahoma won the game by several points, but Barry Sanders for Oklahoma State rushed for 215 yards. And Mike Gundy was a quarterback at Oklahoma State in that game. and last possession threw a pass into the end zone to an open receiver deep in the end zone. He dropped the ball, and so the game went Oklahoma's way. But that game was just the intensity. You know how it is when you're watching a game, and you can almost feel it's so palpable, the intensity and how much these teams want to win, even if it's a one-sided rivalry.
Absolutely. John, is Oklahoma where does it rank in terms of your favorite states in the lower 48?
It's definitely in the top 10.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
so.
I've always liked the
Very
West.
fitting for you to save this
Yeah,
one.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always liked the West,
Hmm.
and a lot of people don't think of Oklahoma. We think of it as Midwest, but it really is West. I mean, it's the you know, watch a lot of old Western movies. Oklahoma showed up in that, and I do like the. I've actually not many people can say this. I've even been to Stillwater, Oklahoma. So
Was that on the Jacksonville dime when you were in the when you were columnist out there? Did you go to Stillwater on the Jacksonville newspaper's
it
dime?
was, but it actually
Of
it
course.
actually had a local peg to it because it looked like Oklahoma would be invited to the Gator Bowl, and that was a big deal in our town.
Mm,
I did cover the Gator Bowl the 2 years I was there. So I went flew to Stillwater. Don't remember the flight plan, how I got there, but I sure did.
amazing. All right, I got one more to save, John. I agree with you wholeheartedly on Bedlam. I mean, when your rivalry is called Bedlam, I think
Yeah.
that tells you everything you need to know
Mhm.
right there. That is a game that should be played every year, and this is one that was disrupted quite obviously by Oklahoma leaving the
Sure.
Big 12 and coming to the SEC. I mean, look, I think it makes total sense from Oklahoma's perspective to go to the SEC. It's hard to argue with their decision making in that process, but much like when Texas A&M got disrupted for several years after A&M left the Big 12 until Texas came into the SEC, that rivalry was interrupted. This is one right alongside it. It's been one of the costs of conference expansion and conference realignment. And I agree with you. I hate that this one's not an annual game. My last pick, I think when you have the word war in the name
Mhm.
of your rivalry, that should be a rule. Your game is played every year if you call your game some sort of war.
Mhm.
And Missouri, Kansas is the border war. And this game to those two programs was everything, right? I mean, Missouri fans' favorite team is Missouri. Their second favorite team is whoever's playing Kansas. And in fact, sometimes I think their favorite team is whoever's playing Kansas, and their second favorite team is Missouri, and vice versa. And no, I mean there were some seasons these teams were not on top of college football. There was a very notable game in which they were in 2007, that game at Arrowhead, when Kansas had quarterback Todd Reesing and Missouri had quarterback Chase Daniel. I was in college at that time, and that was the game at Truman State University in Northeast Missouri because we had all
Mhm.
kinds of students from Kansas City. And also a lot of students from St. Louis who were Mizzou fans. So you had Mizzou fans from both Kansas City and Missouri, and St. Louis. You had KU fans that were kind of discovering football for the first time, or discovering football that late in the schedule for the first time. Huge game. But again, and this one was maybe big or bigger in college basketball as it is in football. But again, how do you have something called the border war and you're not going to play it every year anymore? It was played last season in a rivalry renewal. I mean, this rivalry quite literally dates to the Civil War and the pro-slavery and the anti-slavery factions fighting each other along the Kansas Missouri border in the years leading up to the Civil War. And I mean that is the literal roots of this rivalry. It predates sports, predates anything that was happening on the field. So again, one that was kind of shoved aside for conference expansion, conference realignment when Mizzou left the Big 12 and joined the SEC. This one fell off the annual docket for many, many years, and I think that's wrong. I think these teams should play every year, and there's kind of a theme here, John. A lot of ours kind of have some Big 12 or Big 8 ties to them, don't they? When you think about some of the ones we're saving
yes,
here.
I know. And it's we haven't mentioned anyone in the ACC. I was trying to think. I can't, as much college football as I've watched all through the years, I can't think of one play in the Missouri-Kansas game that I can remember. It just wasn't. You had proximity to it. I didn't, and it was
Right.
just kind. And it was one of the. Maybe I bet a lot of people in the Midwest, Northeast, Big Ten country don't think much of the old Mississippi State rivalry. It's just two Mississippi schools, or no big deal. But if you've experienced it, and I covered as a columnist in Jackson, I know what a big deal it is, and the intensity of it. But as I remember, so I can remember when Dan Devine was the coach at Missouri when I was a kid, and it was really good. Missouri back then was really good under Dan Devine. And I really can't. I'm trying to think. Is there one game that stands out to you other than the one you mentioned? Is there another game that stands out in that rivalry?
I mean, no. I think that the 07 one for me is
Mm-hmm.
that just leaps off the page because I mean Missouri and Kansas were both that year competing for the national championship. I mean Missouri
Right.
was in position to go until they lost to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game after beating Kansas at Arrowhead in front of 80,000 plus there. So yeah, for me, I mean that one is the one that stand out just because they were both so good that particular year. But there were other years where it's like these teams were like, 5-6, 4-7 playing each other. Whereas it's like you said, it's kind of like the Egg Bowl. Doesn't matter what the records were of those teams when they play each other. It is knockdown, drag out. This is an old quote, John, from former Kansas coach Don Fambro. He described the rivalry like this. He said, quote, "We're the good people, they're the bad people. That's the best way I know how to explain it. I don't like their people. I don't like their players. I don't like a damn thing about them." End quote. That's what the Kansas coach had to say about Missouri. So,
Well, the closest thing I can think of to that, again on Jacksonville's dime, I covered the St. Louis World Series against Kansas City in 1985, and it was I got a sense of the proximity of those two programs.
mm-hmm. All right. Well, there's our list: Nebraska, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Colorado, USC, Notre Dame, Michigan, Notre Dame, Alabama, LSU, Florida, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Kansas, Missouri. I'm sure we omitted one. If you could save just one, John, just one on an annual basis of your 4 picks, I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, so surprise question. But if you could only pick one from those 4, which one would you save?
Well, see, you changed my opinion on the Nebraska-Oklahoma series because I'm talking about a rivalry that was great and when the programs were preeminent nationally,
Mm-hmm.
and Nebraska's just not that anymore. So that's no good. I guess I would go. With Southern Cal and Notre Dame
I
because
think that's a great pick. Yeah.
I look at Notre Dame's next schedule without USC. It's really a lot of softies on that schedule, and I don't like the idea that Notre Dame can just go through Pickett's pretty much, be very selective in whom it schedules, and then work its way into the college football playoff. And maybe that's why those games I remember so vividly from that series from long ago were when Southern Cal cost Notre Dame national champions. championships. If not for Southern Cal, Notre Dame would have been playing as the number one team in the nation on New Year's Day.
Yeah, a Notre Dame schedule without Southern Cal and without Michigan. That's no schedule at all. All right, we'll leave it there. John, again, for our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We're going to stick with college football for maybe another week or two, but we have some college hoops to get to when March and the SEC tournament, March Madness roll around. We're going to flip this football podcast into March Madness mode, and John and I will be talking about the greatest postseason event in all of sports, that is March Madness. But stick with us for a little bit more football talk, and we're going to get to hoops soon. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.